When you think of your favorite musicians, who comes to mind? Maybe it's jazz trumpeter and singer Louis Armstrong, or classical pianist and composer Ludwig van Beethoven, or maybe it's Paul McCartney from the Beatles. But how come these musicians are all male? Or, in other words, where are all the women? Today, we're going to discuss just that and talk about how women shape themselves in the music industry. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about why men dominate the industry in the first place. In the 1920s, jazz became the most dominating genre of music in the United States, but at the same time, men and women had a very different role in society. Women only took 23.6% of the labor force in 1920, and this is because married women were commonly known to be housewives and in turn did not get paid as much as men did. Overall, women were shamed for taking jobs away from men and were discouraged from taking a job in the labor force. Because of these events in the 1920s, including the role of men and women at the time, music, and jazz especially, has become extremely male-dominated, and female musicians have faced many issues, including inappropriate treatment from sexist sound guys who would give women special treatment, a lack of confidence to become a musician, a lower chance of being signed on a record label, being locked out of the male bonding culture that many music genres promote, and most of all, women are often perceived as being less capable than men are. Now, let's talk about some experiences of female musicians. Some common experiences that female musicians experience are, one, most notably, being the only female in a jazz band or other music ensemble. Female musicians also get a lot of prejudice if they're rhythm section players, such as drums, bass, guitar, or piano. Another common experience for female musicians to have is being complimented as good for a woman, which, while it sounds good on paper, is actually very rude and condescending. Also, female singers are often marginalized for being a woman and a singer because it's so common nowadays and it's thought that women can only be singers and can't play an instrument. Women also have a difficulty expressing expectations of members in an ensemble because it's most commonly perceived that these roles will be given to men. I took a quick survey of some peers who play classical and jazz music, and I found some interesting results. After gauging the interest in joining a jazz band, I found that some people just felt that they didn't fit in with other jazz musicians, which of course is a very big problem nowadays, especially for young musicians who want to be in a jazz band and express themselves in that genre of music, but are discouraged because all they see are male jazz musicians. Furthermore, it's very common for female musicians to be the only or one of the only female musicians in their jazz band. While it wasn't common in this survey for female musicians to be the only women in their jazz band, it is universally agreed that women in a jazz band are often one of the only women in their school's jazz band. In other words, there's never more than half of women than men in a jazz ensemble. Now, let's talk about the women in jazz movement, which roots from the fact that jazz has become a boys' club over the years, especially for jazz instrumentalists. It's very common for female instrumentalists to be vibed out of a jazz ensemble or a jazz jam session because it's commonly perceived for only vocalists to be female. When you think of popular music versus jazz music, there's a very clear divide. When the average listener thinks of pop music, they think of female singers such as Katy Perry or Taylor Swift, or maybe even Beyonce. But in jazz, when you learn a jazz standard, it's most commonly going to be from either Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, John Coltrane, or Miles Davis, who, while they all contributed amazingly to the jazz industry, they're all men and often did not collaborate that much with women. While men inarguably do dominate the jazz industry, there are many examples of female jazz musicians, vocalists, and instrumentalists. Barbara Carroll, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Dinah Washington, and Nancy Wilson are all very well-known jazz vocalists, and Sherry Maricle, Alexa Tarantino, and Terry Lynn Carrington are all jazz instrumentalists, with Sherry Maricle and Terry Lynn Carrington being band leaders and also playing the drums, which is very uncommon for women nowadays. One of the organizations hoping to change the world of jazz through this Women in Jazz movement is the Women in Jazz organization. Quote, Women in Jazz organization intends to help level the playing field in jazz so that women and non-binary people have equal opportunity to participate in and contribute to jazz, leading to an improved and more rich, diverse, and successful art form, end quote. Believe it or not, there is actually a jazz ensemble comprised entirely of women called the Diva Jazz Orchestra. Quote, hard-charging, powerful, immersed in the history of their craft and in total command of their instruments. That's Diva, an ensemble of 15 extremely talented and versatile musicians who just happen to be women. They can't help it. They were born that way, end quote. The Diva Jazz Orchestra is comprised entirely of women and is proving to everyone that jazz is not about your gender. It's about your talent and your will to prove others wrong. Now, let's listen to a clip of the Diva Jazz Orchestra playing a quarter past the last minute at the New Trier Jazz Festival this year. One aspect of the music that is really important to notice here is that this orchestra does not just play women's music or any special kind of music because they're a women's jazz orchestra. They're a jazz orchestra comprised entirely of women that plays normal jazz music to try to fit in with the rest of the jazz culture and prove that women are extremely capable of playing jazz. Now, to wrap things up, let's talk about what women are doing now to shape the jazz industry of the future. First, we have the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, one of the many institutes at the Berklee College of Music where undergraduate students can experience a wide variety of courses, ensembles, and professional development opportunities in a specific area of music. Quote, the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice will focus on equity in the jazz field and the role that jazz plays in the larger struggle for gender justice. The Institute will celebrate the contributions women have made in the development of the art form, as well as frame more equitable conditions for all pursuing careers in jazz in an effort to work towards a necessary and lasting cultural shift in the field, end quote. Next, we have the Next Generation Women in Jazz combo. In 2020, they had the opportunity to perform for the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice at Berklee College of Music. Quote, the Women in Jazz combo was such a success in 2019 that many other organizations took notice and wanted to see how they can help contribute and highlight young women in jazz music, said Katie Thuros. Berklee College of Music stepped up and invited them to Boston to visit their Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. There, the combo will meet each other for the first time, rehearse, do a main event performance, and they'll meet up and work with leading female musicians and professors in workshops, clinics, and discussion panels. For our last example about how women are shaping the jazz and music industry today, we have the Iowa All-Female Jazz Orchestra from the Iowa Music Educators Association. Quote, on Friday, November 17, 15 women met at the 2017 Iowa Music Educators Association Conference in Amos, Iowa, for the first rehearsal of the Iowa All-Female Big Band. The purpose of this group is to perform at middle school/high school jazz festivals and clinics in order to encourage young female musicians to find their voice in the jazz idiom, end quote. So, what can we all do collectively to ensure that the future of music is female? First, we need more initiatives, more organizations such as the Women in Jazz organization, and more ensembles to prove others that women are extremely capable of making their own amazing music. Next, we need to let go of traditional ideas that men are more capable than women, because this is just not the case. And we need educators to promote equal opportunity in the music classroom for every student of every gender to be able to create their own music and collaborate with others. Lastly, through the progression of time, we have seen that society for the most part has been extremely open to change, and hopefully we will also see this with the rise of women in the music industry, because with all these initiatives and ideas in place, women can be the face of the music industry.